Coming up on Network Africa, the African Union threatens to suspend Sudan if the military council does not hand over power to civilians within 60 days. The United Nations warns that fighting in Tripoli is severely affecting health facilities and health personnel in Libya's capital. Ugandan pop star and lawmaker Bobi appears in court after being charged with disobedience of statutory duty. Hello and welcome to the program. I am Amarachi Ubani. We begin in Sudan as the African Union expresses regret that the military authorities in the country have not handed over power to civilians. Shortly after President Omar al-Bashir was overthrown 3 weeks ago, the AU had given the military 15 days to transfer power. Now it's given the coup leaders another 60 days to step down in favor of civilians. If they fail to do this, the AU says Sudan will be suspended from the bloc. Meanwhile, the military leaders have been holding discussions with protest leaders and opposition figures on how to manage the transition to democratic rule. Let's get some perspective on this now. African affairs analyst Alistair Wilcox joins us now via Skype. Mr. Wilcox, thank you for joining us on Network Africa. What do you make of this new threat by the African Union suspending Sudan from the bloc within 60 days if there's no transition to civilian rule? Bearing in mind they made this threat before, just as the military was coming into power.
Amarachi, I think the AU is a toothless bulldog. They make themselves a toothless bulldog because none of the AU members or current members, even the president, is free from this kind of undemocratic behavior. Just remember, recently, even the chairman of AU talking about the president of Egypt, in his own country, has amended the constitution in such a ridiculous way to give himself extension in power. So AU has made themselves irrelevant and a toothless bulldog. And remember, AU has a policy of non-interference in other people's, in the affairs of other nations. And that is why most times we have these situations and they cannot do anything other than just to talk and talk alone. Now let us look at what has happened in the past in Sudan. Sudan, AU has tolerated Omar Bashir all this while, even when there was an international arrest warrant from the International Criminal Court against al-Bashir, and the AU did nothing. Now, it has taken the indigenes of Sudan, that is the common man, the citizens of Sudan, to bring down the government of al-Bashir. And the military just stepped in order to create a kind of buffer, a kind of stopgap. And the AU want to flex their muscles. The first ultimatum has gone unheeded, and so this second will go unheeded. And so AU should reinvent himself and make itself relevant, not to be like a toothless bulldog, which they are as presently constituted.
Right, you're saying Sudanese people have all the power they need to be able to change their own governments. But I'm wondering if, this threat will have any effect at all on the Sudanese people or on the military council, which already has drawn up a lineup for the transition to power, which they said will take place in 2 years. What will they lose anyway if they're suspended from the African Union?
I do not know in real terms what Sudan will lose from not being members of the African Union. As far as I'm concerned, African Union has made itself so irrelevant that they're just a block of head of states who meet every year and click glasses and deliver speeches and with nothing concrete to gain or to achieve. So it may not be too much. I would have expected EU to try as much as possible to hide their head in shame as to what has happened in Sudan, because they had the opportunity of ostracizing al-Bashir all this while, when at the time al-Bashir had that arrest warrant hanging on his neck. They had a good opportunity then to have ostracized al-Bashir and make him a patriarch in Africa, so that his exit would have been faster. But right now that the people of Sudan took the power by themselves and ousted al-Bashir, what AU can do now is to encourage the current military to, in the transition, not giving ultimatum, to encourage them that if they are giving a 2-year transition, there should be a negotiation as to, look, can we shorten it to 1 year or can we shorten into 9 months? Can we work with you to have a smooth and seamless transition, not threat? Because right now, AU is in no position because they never contributed to this situation. They never helped the people of Sudan, so they are in no position to issue threats. It is now to have a constructive engagement with the current military leadership in Sudan. Remember, they came in as stopgap as necessity. Now, what AU can do is to encourage them so that they do not perpetrate themselves in office. Because AU really has not lived up to its expectation. That is just the unfortunate thing.
Yeah, and I kind of agree with you there because of that. I mean, the AU not being found, when Sudan was going through its crisis. But there are reports now that what's going on in Sudan is being heavily influenced by external players such as Saudi Arabia, they're mentioning other Gulf allies. I don't know how much you agree with this because the reports are saying that they're waging a multi-front battle for the influence against Qatar, especially Turkey. Do you agree with this, and are you worried about it?
Well, I do not have any empirical evidence to that fact. I have tried to check up, but it should not be an impossible situation. Because remember, there is a war between the Sunnis and the moderate Islamic in the Middle East, for which Qatar is on one side and Saudi Arabia is on the other side. So they are now looking for, yes, there is the possibility of looking for expansion of their territories in order to gain better advantage. So it's not impossible. And that is where the AU has failed. Because if look, nobody will come and defend their country for your continent. You are the only one. If they turn Sudan into a war zone like they have turned Yemen to a war zone, right now Yemen is boiling. And if AU will not be sensible and constructive enough as to guide the transition that's happening, and then they turn Sudan into another Yemen or into another Libya, then to Africa, the influx of refugees and all would be too much for them to manage. Yes, there could be those possibilities. Of course, Saudi Arabia will want to expand its territory. Qatar, with a lot of money, will want to expand their territory. And Sudan is a willing, it's a fertile ground. Right now, what AU need to do and other multinational bodies is to come together and ensure that Sudan does not generate to such inglorious power play or religious power play, so that we don't have another Yemen on our hands. And I think AU need to act in that respect other than to issue threats. Threats will not work. A constructive engagement with the opposition and the military is the only way to go for AU at this point.
Thank you so much. Your opinions are very valid on the show. Thank you again for joining us on Network Africa.
It's my pleasure, Marachi. Thank you for having me.
In other news, the United Nations has expressed worry that fresh fighting in Tripoli is severely affecting health facilities and health personnel in the capital, Tripoli. UN spokesperson Stefan Dujarric says since the beginning of the conflict, 102 civilian casualties have been verified, including 23 fatalities. He adds that over 45,000 people have now fled their homes due to the clashes.
Our colleagues on the ground tell us that hostilities in Tripoli continue to impact health facilities and health personnel. There have been at least 4 fatalities among health workers since the beginning of this current conflict, and 11 ambulances have to date been damaged or destroyed as a result of the hostilities. The armed clashes, random shelling, and explosives placed on roads are hampering the ability of humanitarian workers to evacuate civilians and to deliver needed aid, as well as the ability of civilians to move freely to safer areas or to be able to access vital goods and services. We are also continue to remind all parties of their obligations under international humanitarian law to take constant care to spare civilians and civilian infrastructure, including medical personnel and medical or health facilities. Since the beginning of the conflict, 102 civilian casualties have been verified, including 23 fatalities, and over 45,000 people have now fled their homes due to the clashes, and that's according to the UN Migration Agency.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel has called for faster response to defeat Islamist extremism at the end of an extraordinary summit she held with leaders of the G5 Sahel. The regional force is made up of soldiers from Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, Chad, and Mauritania. This meeting comes amid a rise in violence across the Sahel region, but concentrated in Mali and Burkina Faso, where attacks have surged. Much earlier, Ms. Merkel promised Burkina Faso more than 20 million euros in fresh aid and said Germany would send a further 60 million to the G5 Sahel group. The German Chancellor, who is also offering aid of 35 million euros to Niger, is aiming to stimulate private investment in the region with German government support. Burkina Faso is one of the poorer African countries with gross domestic product of less than $1,000 per person. Ugandan musician turned lawmaker Bobi Wine has testified at his bail hearing via video link from the prison where he is currently being held after being charged with disobedience of statutory duty. He had been arrested on Monday for organizing a protest against attacks on the use of social media. Bobi Wine, whose real name is Robert Kyagulanyi, was, however, defiant, saying, "If standing for what is right is going to hand me my freedom, I will thank God for it. If standing for what is right is going to keep me in this prison, then I will thank God even louder." End of quote. Meanwhile, Uganda's media regulators ordered 13 radio and television stations to suspend some of the journalists and editors, accusing them of misinterpreting information and inciting violence by broadcasting, quote, extremist or anarchic messages. The regulator did not specify cases of alleged breaches in the directives sent to the 13 media houses, but it is believed that the UCC is angry about their coverage of the arrest of Bobi Wine and protests by his supporters on Monday. So I have you here with me, African Affairs Analyst Mr. Declan Ihekari. Thank you so much for joining us on Network Africa. First of all, let's know your thoughts on this, the arrest of the 13 media regulators, ordering them to suspend, the order to suspend editors, journalists, and 13 media organizations for what they called extremist or anarchic messages. First of all, do you think those messages are really extremist?
There's nothing extremist when it comes to reportage of the media. The media is supposed to be an informant, you know, informing the people of the happening in any nation, in any place that they find themselves. But you find out that when you have desperate leaders who doesn't want to be heard, who doesn't want to be criticized, they will always have a way of silencing the media. And it happened in this country some time ago in Nigeria. It happened during the military era. And if it's happening now, it shows the desperation of our leaders to clinch to power, to resist protest, to resist other voices that are quite different from theirs. It's quite disheartening.
Yeah, and speaking of protests, you see a lot of them going on in Africa now, and they seem to be having such, you know, an impact, you know, on the governments. Algeria, Zimbabwe, Sudan, yes, the most recent of them all. And you know, these voices are getting louder and louder. Do you think there's a revolution going on in Africa? You know, a fire set off in one place that's just spreading across the continent, bringing the wind of change?
Yeah, definitely. The revolution is going on, and it's spreading wide. Especially it's touching countries that are malgoverned, countries that corruption is so much, you know, embedded.
You think Uganda will be one of them?
Yes, of course, Uganda is one of them. And coming back home, Nigeria could be affected soonest. There's no doubt about it, because there's a cry on the streets. The people are crying everywhere. The masses are crying, and so if it happened in Sudan and it worked out, and it's happening somewhere else in Africa, then it shows that our leaders should work towards making sure that they better the lifestyle of the masses.
Yeah, but I'm mentioning Uganda because of what's currently going on with Bobi Wine, who's still in prison,
yes,
and who even had to attend his own court hearing, his own court trial, yes, while in prison. Yes. Do you think any change will come to that country? President Museveni has been there for more than 25 years, and you know there are plans for him to stay even longer.
Yeah. What is happening in Uganda now will definitely propel the people to more action. It will ginger them to more action. And don't forget, Africans are very strong when it comes to protesting and getting what belongs to them. And so what you see in Uganda now is that Uganda will want to emulate the Sudanese style. And it's a signal to our leaders that they should wake up to the responsibility. Any leader that is not working or working out with the masses will surely be protested out of government. And that's the position.
Well, I don't know about that. I know that the
revolution
has started.
Well, if you don't know about that, I know that the masses are working towards changing the system if the government refuses to change the system.
Okay, now that will take a while, though. But thank you so much for speaking with us, Mr. Ihekari. I appreciate your being here on Network Africa.
Thank you.
Stay with us. The program continues after the break. Still ahead, fuel distribution workers in Tunisia begin a 3-day strike to demand higher wages. Stay with us.